I've always been a bit fascinated by the relationship of what purports to be sophisticated civilization up against the primitive instincts and survival, and what happens to human beings under that kind of pressure. I tend to like stark drama, and there's the old Howard Hawks dictum, about what is drama, and the great Hawks said, "Will he live or will he die?" That's drama. So it's a good starting point for the action cinema, isn't it? My producing partner, David Giler, who was also often my writing partner, was very taken with the Cajun sequence in a movie I had done a couple years before with Charlie Bronson, and he thought that merited further exploration. Maybe we could do a feature around that idea. Fox wanted us to make some low-budget action features, and so we developed a script. We hired Michael Kane, and there is a truncated setup to the film in terms of the National Guard and what they're doing on their summer exercises. It's truncated because we always thought that Americans always understand this stuff, that a lot of guys join the National Guard because they don't want to go into the Army. It's a way they go away on a few weeks training, and then they owe these exercises once a year, and they go one night a month to down to the armory to take a series of lectures or something, or refamiliarize themselves with their weapons. But it's kind of mix and match who they throw you out there with and your summer exercise. And this would have been, they have winter exercises, they have summer exercises. And they go out for 2 or 3 days on camping and hiking and et cetera, et cetera. And this becomes the Lost Patrol. Probably to European audiences, the word militia would be more, we just tend to call them the National Guard. And the idea is, oddly enough, they are not national, they are by state, but they can be mobilized on a national level by federal command, so that when manpower is deemed insufficient for some military operation, the theory is that they can be energized and brought in to help the United States Army in a situation, as in, for instance, Iraq, and I believe in Vietnam, they were occasionally mobilized and sent over, much to their distress. Now, that's the official. Unofficially, the National Guards have often been havens of, how do I put this, people who were simply trying to avoid military duty. They've also been havens, I think Robert Aldrich made a film about this, where they're often political, very politicized on the state level, and it's a way of rewarding your supporters with these kind of military commands. It's been a continuing in American history. Half the Union forces that fought the Civil War were the mobilization of the state militias, and so many of the generals that were then came into the American Civil War were incompetent because they had just been these state-appointed political figures with no real military understanding, and it was a vexing thing to the military establishment, who desperately needed the numbers but did not need bad generals. We shot in late fall of 1980. We were based in Shreveport, Louisiana. We shut down for Christmas and then came back and shot through January and I think finished kind of mid-February, if memory serves correctly. We did pick difficult locations, but we thought they were true to the story, and it was miserable. It was about as physically miserable a film as I've ever done. We'd have to go out and put on these rubber wetsuit things, the crew. The cast had rubber wetsuits on under their bulky uniforms, and we would be, we were right out in it, and so much of the swamp has a soft bottom, so we didn't have very many, and they didn't work very well, the little rafts, so we really just literally had to put the, we were on long sticks, tripods, and we put them in the water and into the ground under the water, but you had to be very quick because you would lose the setup because the tripod would slip off center. We would rehearse, and I would be standing there with Andy. Andy Laszlo was the cameraman. He passed away this last year. He was a wonderful man, wonderful cameraman. A relationship that I cherished as a filmmaker, and he was game to set the tiny amount of lights that we used, set the camera and shoot. And but every setup seemed like a nightmare to get. And but you know, the filmmakers are always telling stories about how harrowing the circumstances were of making the film. I tend to pay no attention to that. It's we get judged by what we end up with, and it was a tougher movie to make than most, but every movie has its problems, and sometimes the problems are physical, and sometimes the problems are psychological or emotional, and sometimes and often financial, and sometimes you get all of the above. So. But again, one does one's best with the choices you make, and if I had it to do over, I would not do it differently, or the CGI revolution wouldn't have impacted any of the choices that I made on the film. It's a curious film, I think, in a lot of ways. Anything that's a drama, you need to have conflicting types, and you need to bring characters together that don't have exactly the same background and the same outlook on life, different experiences thrown together under a pressure situation. People have always asked, how much is Southern Comfort informed by the political feelings of the 70s and the Vietnam War and etc. I always refuse to answer any of those questions, but I did say to the cast, we had a cast read through for 2 days before we started. And I said, people will be asking you, is this film metaphoric for Vietnam? And I said, if I catch anybody playing a metaphor, they're fired. And there is no answer to the question, so move on from there. It's just as perfectly valid to analyze the film as a displaced Western. It deals with most of the classic Western themes, which is human beings solving problems beyond the control and purview of organized civilization. And it deals finally with moral questions. I always say making Westerns doesn't seem to always be the most fun for an audience, but it's probably the most fun for filmmakers. And one of the chief reasons, I think, is it's kind of like you're putting on a robe and walking around in the Old Testament. They tend to be Old Testament kind of stories with the most complicated human questions and seemingly against a seemingly simple environment. Is when you make an all-male film, there are certain limitations, I think, that happen with the audience. I'm not in favor so much of all-male films as I think certain stories are like that and are true to that. I happen to be interested in a lot of those stories. Keith Carradine and Powers Boothe were both very exciting young actors that were showing that they had the kind of dramatic power to carry films. Personally, like them both very much. I like working with them. They get along quite well with each other too, and they've both had, if not spectacular careers, very honorable careers since then, I believe. Keith is a bit of a Southern aristocrat in the thing, but his character understands the stratum of particularly white society in a state like Louisiana. Keith is a deceptively naturalistic actor. He makes almost everything believable in a low-key, straightforward presentation. He's one of the very fine members of a great theatrical family. He's proud of, with all the complications of a family in show business, and there were and have been a lot of complications, but he's very proud of his family and his place in the family. He's a very sensitive guy, but at the same time he's very, very decent and very fair-minded, and he can do. He's a director's dream in the sense that virtually anything you ask him to do, he can do. He can sing, he can dance, he can ride a horse, he can shoot a gun, he can kiss a girl, he's just, his versatility is an enormous asset to his persona. I'd worked with him on The Long Riders, and again, I was obviously very impressed with him. And I've worked with him now and then and again over the years. Powers Boothe's character has moved to Louisiana from Texas, and he has transferred his National Guard into this new outfit. The others more or less know each other. Powers has the great saturnine, brooding persona. I used to call him the Hamlet of the prairies. He's very much a Texan. He's a very strong actor, and he's got that great voice, and you feel the great power within him, which he restrains because he knows his own. There's a terrible force within him as characters that he often plays, and then lets it out in a burst that's just magnificent. He's theatrically trained, which is always a surprise when you say, well, he's an actor, he's from Texas, he likes horses, he da-da-da-da, and all those things are true about Powers. You tend not to think of them as being classically trained. He's a very classically trained. He has been an acting coach himself and directed. And he's an amiable man, but he's a serious man, and he's serious about his craft. I thought he was wonderful in the thing I just saw him do here for American television, Hatfields and McCoys. He's one of the brothers of Kevin Costner, and I thought just did a brilliant job. We should talk about Fred Ward's character Reese a bit, because he's pivotal on the dark side of the drama, and he's an interesting man to work with. Another Texan, taciturn fellow. You feel a reservoir of strength, potential violence, dark sensibility. Always played bad guys, I thought, very, very well. But Fred never wanted to play bad guys. He's like a lot of actors. They resist sometimes the natural arc of a career. I thought he was very good in the movie, very suggestive. The best actors, when people talk about actors, they so often are talking about line readings. Well, the very best film actors are so suggestive with physical mannerism, their look, the intonation. Fred, in the best sense, always reminded me a lot of Charlie Bronson, who I thought Charlie was very good in the film that I did with him. And there was something about Fred, there is a certain physical similarity, but I like Fred. He's very quiet and he's very professional. Now, he can throw a mean look, there's no question. And he's another one that doesn't, he doesn't like a lot of messing around in rehearsal and all that. And some of the actors are kind of jokey, and everything. And Fred didn't always go for that, so he's a serious fellow. Franklin Seals, who died quite young. He was a wonderful guy, and I thought a wonderful actor, and I thought his death scene and what led up to his death scene was one of the finest pieces of work in the movie. He was establishing himself as a very serious and very talented character actor. He did lots of local theater in Los Angeles, and he was so wonderful in The Onion Field, the film about the policemen that were murdered, where he was one of the killers, and that's where he'd come to my attention. He gave a brilliant performance, but he was a very sweet and gentle soul, and he was that kind of combination. He was very learned, very well read. At the same time, he was very funny. He was paralyzingly funny. But he was overtly sensitive, and he absolutely made no apologies for who he was. And when occasionally somebody would tease him, some of the other rougher cast members, I'd say, or something like that, he was ferocious in his responses. I liked him so much. He was so tough in his defense of his intellectual prowess, the fact that he was such a well-read person. But he was a remarkable guy. I feel very badly. One of the warriors died very young, just a few years after, and then Franklin passed, I think, within 5 years of when we worked together. And I used to see him. I used to go to his plays, and he was a lovely man. You know, show business is, you work in movies, and you make relationships and friendships. It's hard to, but at the same time you're called in different directions, and the circus takes you off to, you may like somebody and hopefully have done good work with somebody, and you may not ever work with them again, not through any design or just the luck of it all. Peter Coyote, who I hear his voice constantly, he narrates so many things, and of course he still acts, and he came in and departed very quickly because his part was small, but the trick was, it seemed to me, to cast somebody to seem like they were the kind of actor that was going to be very important in the telling of the tale, and then to get the proper audience shock, then to suddenly end that person so that you realize, well, this thing's different than I think it's going to be, and I thought Peter did it well. You know, as a director, you cast, you hope for the best and everything like that. But when it works, and when you get somebody that you think is doing it the way you hoped, or even better than you hoped, you feel a sense of gratitude that's almost beyond expression to them. That sometimes, I know Tim Burton and I laughed about this once. We had run into each other, and we were talking about him working with Jack Nicholson, and Tim said to me, he said, you know, sometimes he knew he had it, but he did another take just because he wanted to see it again. And I know it's so perfectly true that even I, that don't like to do very many takes, sometimes you just do something because you just think it's so terrific what the performer is giving you. And I think my films are not tended to be performance films in the way that maybe other directors are thought of as, but I feel myself very connected to the actors, and I love working with actors. I think it's the most fun we have as directors. The Cajun culture as depicted in the film, this was a bit of a controversy at the time. Some people said that we were not showing the Cajuns in a proper light, and that we had made them too primitive. All the Cajuns that I know loved it, by the way. You know, they had no objection. And that there were, you know, if you go into the Cajun parts of Louisiana and you go to the cities in New Iberia and all that, this is not at all indicative of the way Cajun people live in relationship with their culture, although they're close to the hunting and the fishing but they have a modern, sophisticated society. However, if you go into the back country, there is a lot of very what's the guy say, indigenous living habits. There's one of the lines in the movie, I think. And no Cajun that I have ever met has ever come over to me and said anything other than how much he liked the movie, and thought that the reaction of the hunters to the spoilage and the aggression on the part of the soldiers was perfectly within the Cajun character. The boucherie, the depiction of the boucherie, they're not, by 1980, they were not very common, but they were still absolutely done all the time. That is to say, the killing of the pig and the making sausage and all that right there while you are part of the music and party and drinking and having a good time. That's a very Cajun, let the good times roll. I've always been fascinated by Cajun music. That was really my window in to interest in Cajun culture. A fascination that was shared by Ry Cooder, who I recruited. I had worked with him, I thought, to my great pleasure, and the film, he had so helped, I thought, the Long Riders. And Ry was also quite interested in Cajun music. Ry Cooder, I think one of the best things, if I look, I tend not to want to look back upon my career, but at the same time, I like to look forward. However, I certainly think that working with Ry is one of the real highlights. He's a quiet man. He's to say that he's a wonderful musician is to state the obvious to the point of stupidity. He had done an album called Jazz, and there was a couple of cuts on the album that I thought that were attempts at kind of 19th century jazz sounds. They're the proto-jazz, jazz. And I thought maybe some of that the sound might apply on Long Riders. Anyway, that's how we met. And of course, then the studio didn't want him. So I immediately got into one of my fights with the studio, and they didn't want him because he had never done a score for a film. Probably, now that I look back at it, not a totally bad reason, I suppose. There was a logic, but anyway, I got my way, and Ry did a wonderful score, and so, and you know how the movie business is. By the next movie you do, everybody's saying to you, "Do you think you can get Ry Cooder?" And but I certainly never looked to anybody else. And I talked to Ry, and I had when I worked with Ry, I always try to get him in as early as possible, and I want him thinking about it. And I have him read the script, and we talk about the movie. And on Southern Comfort, he came to the set several times. He worked with the Cajun musicians down there. He recorded down there, and then he came back and recorded again his own stuff, the main title stuff. That was all done here in Hollywood. But he was, and then he did the thing that it seems to me to be very Ry Cooder. He came to me and he said, "You know, what we need for a lot of this stuff is a Japanese flute." And I thought, "Japanese flute?" He said, "I know a guy plays this Japanese, and we'll get him to make," he says, it'll work great. Well, of course, it was one of the keys to the score, and it was one of the, it became a sound that both signified isolation and paranoia and danger, and it was a beautiful idea. Directors are so different. You know, first place, directors don't know each other very well. We don't work together. We work by definition apart on our films, and so how one director does something Another director doesn't really quite see it. They're not there. We only hear the stories. I tend to like things to move smoothly forward. I like a feeling of confidence about what we're doing, and I don't like a lot of arguing, so I tend to kind of get on top of the situation and keep things fairly smooth and moving. At the same time, I think a certain amount of questioning and friction should always probably be part of the process, because you're trying to tell a story. The story is unique unto itself. There are multiple points of view that you may not have explored at the writer's desk or even in rehearsal. I'm not a big believer in rehearsal. I'm a big believer that you push it out of people there on the set. Conversely, I don't like to do a lot of takes. So, like everything about filmmaking, it's contradictory, it's a riddle, and none of us quite are totally sure of how we get the results that we get. And what's proper for Hitchcock was not proper for Orson Welles, or what was good for Hawks wasn't good for Ford, or whatever. You can fill in the names, but it's always valid. The principle is valid. Southern Comfort, I don't think, is a very realistic movie. People would say, well, it's more realistic than The Warriors. I'm not even sure of that. It uses the kind of signs of an overall realism to get the audience into a story. But it seems to me that it's a rather dark nightmare, and probably approached best on a nightmare level. I never think that anything I do is very realistic, but and I don't think that's to me it's not a problem, but I think I don't think that the job of a director is to imitate realism and the reality of our lives. I think it's to explore ideas and to, in many ways, our dream life and or fantasy life, and that then, if you can get through, if other people are interested in what you're doing, you can have some effect. But I'm mainly, when I make movies, I try to affect myself.